हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम टू माय चैनल। आज हम करेंगे द पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ स्पेंसर्स लाइफ एंड पोइट्री। फ्रॉम द अबव डिस्कशन ऑफ इट, हमने पहले पैराग्राफ्स में जो पढ़ा है, इट में सीम दैट स्पेंसर्स लाइफ वाज डिवोटेड less to the pursuit of poetry and more to the pursuit of rank and acceptability, despite his self proclamations as poet. As we noted in the previous unit, it was not common for courtier poets to establish the primacy of their roles as poets the way Spenser did. In fact, they were at pains to denigrate means belittle, their poetry and themselves as poets, but to equate Spenser either as a person or as a poet, or in his intention and ambitions with the other poets of the age, would be misconceived. Misconceived means not judged properly or wrongly judged. The other poets were mostly from the nobility. They were also courtiers and held political positions in the court of the monarchs. Spenser, on the other hand, did not have any noble antecedents. Antecedents means unke purvaj. He was of humble origin and had moved up the social ladder with the help of education and socially acquired contacts, while his contemporary poets could take their status and rank for granted. Spenser had no such luxury, where other courtiers had personal fortune to fall back on in the event of monarchical disfavor. अगर किंग उनसे नाराज हो जाते ना तो वो अपना स्टेटस वापस ले सकते थे. Spenser had none, and part of his ambition would have been to accumulate precisely that. मतलब उनका तो मकसद ही ये था ना कि ऊपर जाना, मीन्स कुछ रैंक हासिल करना. Hence, where other courtiers could afford to present themselves as humbler or less than able to the demands of poetry, thereby adopting a conventional, even fashionable social and literary gesture. For Spenser, it was in fact important not to belittle himself. Now, this is not to suggest that poets like White, Wyatty, and Surrey were merely affecting the sense of loss and or anguish and or humility that pervaded their poetry. But while they could articulate these unreservedly means completely, Spencer perforce Spencer had to avoid such articulations of humility and unhappiness, and present himself as the herald of as the herald as the messenger of Elizabethan England, where Sydney could proclaim his strong Protestant sentiments through his poetry in terms of its dissatisfaction in the Elizabethan court, and disguise it as the feelings of an anguished lover. Spenser felt it incumbent means obligatory to incumbent means obligatory on him to celebrate Elizabeth and her reign in grander terms than any poet before him. If we put this in terms of a social market where people must offer themselves as socially necessary or desirable people, it was necessary for Spenser to carve a niche in the court. Means carve a niche means get the job in the court, create a demand in the market, so to speak of his social wear, which was poetry. In other words, Spenser had to present himself as desirable rather than denigrate या belittle himself or his poetry. This is not an entirely inappropriate analogy, means comparison. We must remember this was the time when new commodities were beginning to enter England from global trading routes, opening out a mercantile capitalism that was to fundamentally realign the feudal social socio-economy. So for Spencer, to adopt the strategies of the market in relation to his own life and career is not after all so surprising. उस टाइम पे ऐसे ही चलता था ना. An essential aspect of this strategy was the presentation of a different kind of modern moderation from the one practiced and articulated by his contemporaries. Spencer probably sought to distinguish himself from them, tried to distinguish himself from them, but without appearing entirely a misfit. To this end, he crafted a different tension in his poetry from the more common one between desire and its lack of fulfillment. This was a more a metaphysical tension, focusing less on situations and consequently less on his relative success or failure in love, and more on the problem of desire itself within a Christian moral and ethical framework. Within this sensual desire, just wait. Within this sensual desire was seen as debilitating, debilitating, ठीक है, okay, uh, and misleading from true love, yet an inevitable part of being human. Spencer took resource to Platonic notions of love, in which the senses were, or ought to be, governed by the spirit or the soul, and the mistress or beloved was conceived of as the embodiment of a spiritual salvation, to acquire which the lover to acquire which the lover had to transcend sensual desire and focus only on his beloved's virtues. While it was necessary then to acknowledge the urges of sexual and sensual passion, the Spenserian love tried to deal with them through belittling their importance in the larger dimensions of the relationship. This is especially evident in the description of Elizabeth Boyle in stanza 10, which deals with her physical beauty in rapturous terms, and 11, sonnet 11, which then denies its significance in the face of a greater beauty, which is that of her virtuous spirit of the Elizabethan, epithalamian. Through this strategy of elevating the terms of the contemporary poetic discourse of the lover's tension to a Platonic discussion, Spencer sought to means Spencer tried to remain within the larger discourse while pushing back its frontiers. It was a strategy that served well in placing him as a poet of the times, yet as superior to the times. As such, then, Spencer decided on a twofold strategy, one of which was to present himself as a poet able to the demands of the times, and other to not compete in the central arena of power, means the court in London, but to consolidate himself professionally where there was little competition to go. For example, जैसे कि Ireland. Spencer's celebration of his beloved in the Amoreti and Epithalamian is the celebration of a man who has arrived, socially speaking, arrived. For because by the time of the writing of these poems, Spencer was already established as a poet. His the Fairy Queen had been well received, and he was doing well professionally. On the personal front, he had engaged in a passionate relationship that had eventually culminated in marriage. Even the opening passage of the Prothalamian, इसमें बोला गया है, when I home Sulin, Sullein, care through discontent of my long fruitless stay in Princess Court and expectation vain, the VAYNE, of idle hopes which still do fly away like empty shadows did afflict my brain. which is often cited as evidence of Spenser's disaffection for the court, or the despairing vision of stanza 18 and 19 of the Epithalamion, which seems to suggest that Spenser may have been afflicted by losses and anxieties that were of a professional nature, or the sense of being out of his depth in court that we noted earlier in Colin Clout. None of these is sufficient to offset the generally optimistic celebratory tone of the rest of Spenser's oeuvre. Oeuvre means profession. It is in these uh, terms that we can understand the crucial difference of Spenser's poetry from his contemporaries. For Spenser, poetry was a means to an end that was not necessarily the advancement of poetry alone, but personal advancement. In fact, we may even argue that it was precisely by advancing the frontiers of English poetry, that Spenser hoped to achieve a unique distinction and thereby also personal advancement. The personal came together with the political, as so often is true, came together with the पॉलिटिकल, मतलब पर्सनल पॉलिटिकल के साथ ही आ गया था. अब इसको हम लेट अस सम अप करते हैं. कंक्लूजन इसका जो है पूरे यूनिट का वो पढ़ते हैं. इन दिस यूनिट वी डिस्कस्ड सम ऑफ द की इश्यूज इन बायोग्राफिकल क्रिटिसिज्म एंड द, मतलब बायोग्राफिकल क्रिटिसिज्म हमने पढ़ा ना, स्ट्रक्चरलिज्म, नॉन स्ट्रक्चरलिज्म एंड न्यू क्रिटिसिज्म. Okay, the need to examine the lives of writers. We then examine the life of Spenser, such as is known to us in the फिर से इसको पढ़ते. We then examine the life of Spenser in the context of the literary and political climate of his times. We studied how he put to use his educational background as well as the personal and social contacts he acquired to create the image of a poet, a social location from which he was able to meet and match the measures of others, his superior in rank and status. We noted how he adapted the events of his life to his advantage, turning a relatively undesirable posting to Ireland into an opportunity to gain the status of a gentleman of means, and then subsequently presenting himself as a poet who could and would address not individual concerns but national ones. We examined the poetic and personal strategies that were put into play in realizing this ambition. नेक्स्ट यूनिट में हम कुछ इश्यूज़ को पढ़ेंगे जो कि उनकी छोटी छोटी पोएम्स में से रिलेटेड हैं. चलो, थैंक यू सो मच. प्लीज़ सब्सक्राइब माय चैनल.